So Washington is in the Big Ten now, and it's a new era. Not only because of that, but they bring in Danny Sprinkle, who was successful at Montana State, goes to Utah State for a year. Now he's at Washington, been jumping around because he just continues to succeed, brings his boy Great Osobor with him, and the Big Ten's loaded. It's wide open. Washington is not a team really on people's radar, though. So here with Christian Nick here with Roman Tomashoff, who's editor for UW Huskies Wire and the co-host of Locked on Huskies. Thank you for being with us, Roman. So tell us how we're feeling about year one of the Danny Sprinkle era and Washington in the Big Ten.
Yeah, thanks for having me here. This is great. No, I'm really excited about this team. As I was saying, right as we were prepping right before we hit record, after watching so long of just the Mike Hopkins era, it's hard to just, be too excited. But at the same point, you look at the group of guys that Danny Sprinkle has brought in, you look at what he did last year at Utah State, where he had a similar situation where, he didn't have a single returning minute on that roster. Goes in, they go 27-5 and go to the NCAA tournament, win a game there. So he's been through something similar before, and you look at I'm sure we'll get into it, just the amount of talent that he's brought in. It's hard to not be really excited and call Washington probably the biggest sleeper in the Big Ten, in my opinion.
For sure. I mean, it's really hard not to be optimistic about Danny Sprinkle. I mean, just to run off some numbers real quick. He started last season in Ken Palm, 101. They finished 51st. The year prior, they started 173rd. They finished 113th. And that's been the trend every single season he's coached for 5 years, is he outperforms the metrics and he gets the most out of his guys. He does more for less. So let's just get down to the nitty and gritty. This is the main question for me. And the two best players on the roster, in my opinion, are both big men, Frank Kabnag and Great Osobor. I guess my issue is this. Osobor was great last season alongside Isaac Johnson, who was a 7-foot stretch five, could shoot the threes, 33% last season. You're not getting that from Kabnag. He's 0 for 1 in his career through 4 years. So I guess my biggest question with those two guys is just, what will they look like together, and is spacing a concern at all?
So I actually don't think spacing is concerned, where we actually had Danny Sprinkle as a guest on Locked on Huskies a couple of months ago. And one of the things he said to us is that Great has worked really, really hard at shooting the three ball this entire offseason, where obviously the plan for him is to, after his final year, move on to the NBA and everything. And he said he's going to have to stretch out a little bit more. He's going to have to play a true four, which is one of the things I'm most excited about in terms of, what he can do in this offense now. Is he's going to be, I don't want to say pigeonholed into the four, but he can really just thrive in that role where, they used him as an undersized five a lot at Utah State. And I don't think that's necessarily where you're going to see the best version of Great, where now you can, Danny also said that he's going to be a point forward a little bit of times. He's going to bring the ball up the floor, do a little bit of that as well. So I don't think spacing is going to be a concern. And I think with what Frank brings, both offensively and defensively, it's going to be a situation where you're going to get the best out of both guys.
So I'm looking at this backcourt. DJ Davis is a guy that I really liked last year at Butler. Transferred over from somewhere on the West Coast. It was UC Irvine.
It was UC Davis. No, one of the UCs.
It was UC Irvine. I just fact
UC Irvine. Yeah, it uses UC.
Anyways, DJ Davis was a guy that really grew as the season went along. Goes for 28 in a win against Nova, goes for 22 at Creighton, goes for 21 at UConn. Like, this is a guard with some pop, with some juice on the ball. And I thought he was in a really good situation at Butler to lead that team this year. And he goes to Seattle. So one, I assume he got paid and that he was a target for Danny Sprinkle. But two, he's a guard in his fifth year that I think is very just underrated nationally because people didn't really know him out on the West Coast. And then Butler wasn't a tournament team last year. So tell us what you've heard about DJ Davis and expectations for him this season.
So Christian, that's really interesting because, it goes back to something Nick said, where Nick said, number 2 player on the team might be Frank Kapnan. Where we look at Andy Katz, who put out some rankings for the top 10 players in the West Coast. He thinks DJ Davis is the best player on this roster. You talk to some other people, it might be Mekhi Mason, the transfer from Rice, where I'm really curious just to see how it all shapes up. Where when I look at DJ, I think he's going to play a lot of off ball this year. When you look at some of the other guys they brought in, whether it be Luis Courtwright, Tyree Inacho from North Dakota, they also got Zoom Diallo coming in, a highly ranked freshman. So I think that this is going to be something where they're going to give DJ a lot of opportunities to score and a lot of opportunities to do what he does best, which is shoot the three ball. So I think that there's going to be a lot of opportunities for him to play that 2 guard, play it really well. And just with the roster that he's brought in, this is another guy where, like with Great, because I believe DJ was the second player to commit after Mekhi Mason. So he was somebody who's, as you said, Christian, one of those early targets, somebody who committed really early on in the process. And Danny was able to kind of shape this roster and build it up around DJ's skill set.
So yeah, you mentioned Mekhi Mason. Let's dig into some of these other transfers now. Mekhi Mason, up transfer from Rice. Tyree Anacho, up transfer from North Dakota. Tyler Harris, up transfer from Portland. He's taking a lot of risks. He's going kind of low with these guys, but they're good players for sure. What can we expect out of them in year one of Washington in the Big Ten?
I feel like Tyree is the one guy where I'm not necessarily sure what that role is going to look like, where he was take a little bit later in the process. And, I don't want to knock his talent or anything because that's not what I'm saying, but I'm just curious to see how he fits in. When, you talk about Luis Courtwright, who's coming in from URI as well. I feel like that's a guy who in the same conversation, it's what's that role going to look like, where I like him defensively. I know he averaged like a steal a game there at URI. So that's a guy that I really like. Tyler Harris is somebody who I personally believe has the most upside on this roster from anybody not named Great Osborne. Where you look at him and you say, that's a guy who, 6'10", shot the 3 really well at Portland, is continuing to do that. And as he fills out his frame, he looks like somebody who, in a Jaden McDaniels sort of way, to just be a Washington callback there, can be a threat at both ends of the floor, can score really well, can defend any of the 5 positions. And that's somebody who I think, especially as a true sophomore, is not somebody who I think is going to start as the roster stands right now, but moving forward is a guy that I'm really excited about in terms of the future of this roster.
You mentioned DJ Davis, who's a 6'1" guard, who definitely played on ball, out of ball, that he might be playing a bit more off, which means that this freshman Zoom Diallo must have a big role and high expectations for him. I love his name. Fantastic name. Don't know anything about him. Tell me about Zoom.
Zoom is a really exciting player where he's a local guy. Everybody loves the local kids around here. Transferred down to Prolific Prep for his senior season. Coming back, this is somebody who really can slot in right away. And I think one of the reasons they brought in so many veteran guards was to take pressure off of Zoom as a scorer, where whenever he steps onto the floor, he's going to be an elite passer from day one. He's somebody who really ties this offense together and is going to be able to run the floor really well, be able to do a lot of things where his jumper still has a ways to go. He's not necessarily a great pull-up shooter just yet, but the more I watch him, the more I say, this is going to be a guy that can come in, run the offense, probably is going to lead the team in assists this year, just from the way that I've looked at him, the way I've mapped this all out, but I'm really, really excited about his future too.
Yeah, what about the other freshman, Dominique Diamande?
Dominic Diamande, it's a little interesting. He actually isn't listed officially on the roster just yet. Okay. Not necessarily sure how that's going to work out. And just from what I've heard, that's all I'm actually allowed to say on the matter at this time.
Okay.
Jace Butler, another freshman 4-star coming in.
Jace is a lot of fun. I like him from behind the 3-point line. I think he's a really good shooter. I'm not necessarily sure how well he fits into the rotation this season. So I think moving forward, that's something where maybe he redshirts this season, maybe he doesn't, where, it's turned into a really crowded backcourt, honestly. So I think that might be something where he's a really nice long-term take. They got him to flip late from Illinois. So he's a really talented player. And I just think that in terms of when I look at him physically, he's got a little bit of ways to go development-wise before I think he's ready to really slot into a bigger role in this offense.
For sure. I think depth is honestly, the more I look at this roster, it's really good. So this segues me into the next question. I just want to say this first. The Big Ten was ranked 5th last season in post-up frequency. It's just, it's dominated by the bigs. And that fits right into what Danny Sprinkle wants to do. Offensively in post-rated frequency last season, he was 31st, and then 2 prior seasons before that, he was 2nd and 6th. And obviously with Gray and Frank, obviously that's going to work out perfectly. But a great luxury they have is they have rotational bigs. Chris Conway from Oakland, really good player, and then Casey Abikwe from Oregon State.
Abikwe, yeah.
Yeah, another good rotational big. I mean, that is just a great problem to have. Just so many big guys coming in and out. So what can we expect from Conway and Abikwe?
So I think Conway, I'm really curious to see how he's going to slot in. Where the more I watch Casey Ibekwe, I think he's going to be in the same mold as Frank Kepnang, a very defensive-minded guy who's going to be able to be out there next to a Chris Conway, next to a Great Osborne, whoever it ends up being, and just as somebody who can lock down the middle. I don't think that from either Frank or KC, I expect them to be necessarily over the top great scorers. But, Nick, as you said, they're going to be out there to defend the post. And then you have guys like Chris Conway and Great Osborne who can operate in the paint, and Wilhelm Bredenbach as well, who really was a sneaky, nice acquisition last year. And at points was really impressive scoring down low, where I don't know how it's all going to work out in terms of the minutes and who's going to play when and where, but it feels like they've got a couple of really nice defenders and then some nice rotational scorers to complement, obviously, the best player on this roster in Great Osborne.
So in Danny Sprinkle's 5 years as a collegiate head coach, his teams have been top 50 in free throw rate every year. They were fifth in Montana State last year, Montana State, and fourth the year before. And some of that must be personnel driven by Great Osborne. If you remember, Jabril Bello was a guy at Montana State. I'm pretty sure he was first team all Big Sky. So, I mean, making the move to the Big Ten, great. Obviously, I don't think anyone is, questioning his ability to play at this level. I guess my question is, do you think identity wise, right? If Danny Sprinkle coach teams have been, at the Mountain West and the Big Sky level, like bully ball in a way is what they're trying to do. Do you think that stylistically his team is going to try to win the same way in the Big Ten, or do you think with guards like Davis and Zoom, it may be a little bit more pick and roll and stuff on the perimeter, or do you still think it's everything's too great? We want to beat you by being physical on the interior?
So, Christian, that's a great question, because I did ask Danny that question a couple months ago, and he gave me a fantastic coach speak answer of, we're going to play our game. We're going to do what comes naturally. We're going to do everything that flows. I think that with all the guards on this roster, and you mentioned free throws, DJ Davis was a 95% free throw shooter. He's a fantastic shooter from the line. So you have some of those guys that if you want to that's one of the things I really like about this roster is it will adapt to the situation at hand. And the personnel is there, the coaching is there. So I don't necessarily think that they're going to go straight up bully ball, but I don't think it's ever going to be truly dominated by the guards either.
Nick, you got any other questions?
This is a bit non-personnel, more prediction of a question. Just year one, the Big Ten. The Big Ten essentially has no floor this season. Everyone is so good, 1 through 18. Where do you think Washington will end up this season in the Big Ten?
Realistically, I do see them slotting into the top half of the Big Ten. I think this roster really is going to surprise some people. I think, this non-conference slate isn't necessarily the toughest, in my opinion. And then the way this conference schedule shapes up, I like some of the home matchups that they're going to get. And just the more I look at this coaching staff and just how much of an upgrade it is from what the last one was, it really is night and day. And with this personnel, I think they're going to do a really good job of getting these guys together, and they really are going to surprise people in the Big Ten this season.
Back to my Utah State was a team last year that, in a Mountain West where 6 teams made the tournament, everyone's talking about how great a league it was. Obviously, in the tournament, it didn't super play out that way, but Utah State was kind of the team that people didn't really take seriously for a while, even though they continued to win. But they were 7th best last year in a 3-point percentage defense, which there's arguments for that being a luck stat more than a defense stat. But the other thing that they were just so good at, which gets back to my last one, they were the 10th most efficient team inside from 2-point percentage, shooting 57% from 2, and block percentage offensively. They were 6th best, meaning that no one was really protecting the rim against them. Those were things that definitely stood out to me about Utah State last year. Wrapping that into my question now is, assuming health, right? Assuming everyone on the team is healthy. If this team is not good, if this is a bottom 3 team in the Big Ten, why is that?
I would say that it has everything to do with the biggest problem on the roster, which is that they've never played together before. And it's just something where we saw this pop up time and time again during the Mike Hopkins era, where it looked out of sync. And, they would go 5, 6, 7 minutes without a field goal. I don't think that would necessarily be the case here, where I think that because then, they'd end up losing all those games by 3, 4, 5 possessions. But when I look at this roster, I think that would be the biggest problem. It's these guys not gelling in the way that you'd hope in year one of, this another jump for Danny Sprinkle. But I honestly don't necessarily think that's the case, but I think that would certainly be the biggest problem because, you look down low and if you're not giving Casey Beckway and Frank Kempnog more than 8, 9 touches a game in the post, I think that's a recipe to success. And if those are guys that you necessarily need to lean on where defenses are going to rotate heavily over Gray Oswald. So you're going to need to find other options at times. And if neither of those guys are able to step up down low, and if you want to bring up the offensive block percentage, if those are, where the touches have to come from down low, I think that's where you might end up running into another problem.
Last question. So great, comes over from England, goes to Montana State with Danny, follows Danny Utah State, follows him to Washington. I imagine their relationship is special. Do you have any stories or just anything about, the evolution of their relationship? Because Great has really grown as a player and Danny's career has obviously skyrocketed in recent seasons. So what can you tell us just about their relationship? Because I assume Great was very coveted in the portal by everyone, and he did want to stick with this guy.
Oh, absolutely. And that's one thing that Danny's actually spoken about a couple times this offseason that I found really, really interesting, is that he really didn't think Great was going to come with him to Washington. It's something he's been very open, very honest about saying, because Great came down to Louisville, Texas Tech, Kentucky, and Washington. I know Kentucky got eliminated at some point in there as well, but it really did. And Danny didn't necessarily specify, but it felt like he was going to go to Louisville. And getting him is just such a big win. And it speaks to, I think one of the best things about Danny is just, if you look at Great's career trajectory, what he was when he got here, he wins Big Sky 6th Man of the Year that second year at Montana State. He comes over to Utah State with him, wins Mountain West Player of the Year. And now he's a preseason All-American. I know, I think Blue Ribbon had him as one of their preseason All-American guys. So it's just been this constant leveling up for both of them. And to see it intertwine, especially when, Danny was prepared to go on without him. And he built a really solid roster where we looked at it and it was, this roster could compete without Great. It would certainly look a lot better with him there. But for him to say, I was willing to let him go explore other opportunities, but he wanted to come here. He wanted to finish off his career with me. I think that's awesome and really speaks to who Danny is off the court as well.
I have a question real quick.
One more.
I completely forgot about that. So it's a good point. Is Frank healthy? Because I know he missed 18, or he only played in 18 games last season, or only played half the season. Is he healthy?
From everything I've heard, he's healthy, where there were actually rumors that he could have come back last season, but didn't necessarily want to press things later on in the year. So from everything I've heard, he's fully healthy.
Okay, awesome.
Well, there you have it. Roman, thank you so much for joining us. We've spoken in all these Big Ten interviews we've had about this league is going to be a monster. Like it could be 2 games separating 14th place from 5th place. So it's going to be really exciting basketball. And if we have any more Washington questions, I know who my guy is now. So appreciate you, Roman, and hope you have a great season.
Appreciate it, man. Thanks for having me. Truly.